Okay, well, welcome back. We're moving on to Myths of Race, Beyond Static Definitions and Solutions is how I've subtitled it. That's my language, so that you can see, at least visually see a connection there. I don't know how much we were able to go over my slides in the class, so most of this is probably going to be either new or I did it really quickly in the course of reviewing this particular reading. But in my experience in graduate school, this was actually a pretty important piece in that it was influential in a lot of ways in terms of defining new ways of looking at identity within the Mexican American community, which of course I have a particular interest in for obvious reasons. But I'll go over some of this and hope I can explain it. But I this is one of those that I kind of feel I'm not going to do enough justice to in a review session. So hopefully you did do the reading and you were paying attention kind of when we were talking about this the first time. So I'll do this as efficiently as I can. But again, there's some stuff that I don't know if I can do as thoroughly as I would like to. So, toward a new consciousness structures and examples, the opening introduces the text, and these first, probably, the first couple refer to either the way the structure of her argument is laid out, because it's not real obvious sometimes that she is making an argument, except that her language is very strong and straightforward. So it definitely does have a point of view, but it does actually have a coherent argumentative structure. It's easy to miss it, maybe for some people, because it just seems very haphazard and all over the place. But there is something that she's doing, especially the way I describe it here initially, is that she plays on language to engage ideas while introducing basic structural elements. So along with these definitions that she's using, in other words, she's using, like I say here, various types of language disruption. Okay, so the non-structure-y kind of way it reads is intentional because it's supposed to display elements of disruption, both in language and stylistics and perception, really, even. So in this case, that old term that we used before, the medium is the message, still applies. So as you can see, I'm also suggesting some hints about medium and message and how that is the confusion between those two can lead you to some possible confusions, but also some possible complexity that I think is pretty interesting. So let me take a look at here what I have, whether I can help you. The Spanish and English, the poetry are all structural elements. I give you a little bit of the background. There's a reference to a writer thinker, Jose Vasconcelos. I think I'm not familiar with that last name. I know my Sanchez's and Garcias, and obviously because I'm a Sanchez and my next door neighbor was Garcia, but that's a longer word. So mestiza is also a term that you want to remember. Specifically, I think I guess the best interpretation could be mixed. It's mestizas, and she uses the aid, which is the feminine. So that's another thing maybe to keep in mind. It represents the language and the spirituality and the identity of the border. Okay, so those things mix together when she talks about the Mexican American mestiza experience. Okay, so when you do see that, she explains, maybe not as directly as some people would like, but she explains indirectly as well as directly about how these cultures and mixtures take us out of that binary of oppressor oppressed. And if you did the reading, I think if you look at this particular section that she's referring to about oppressor oppressed carefully, I think you'll see what she's talking about. But ultimately, it's about escaping binaries, right? Which means, one side or the other. It's either this or that, right? Good, bad, black, white. There's more to life than that. And she claims in her own way that there's more complexity to that experience when you're looking at the self, because she's using herself as the place of what she calls ambiguity, separating and refining the terms that she uses. Okay. So by investigating the self, she investigates the consciousness of her body and her mind. Pretty heady things. but I think that she manages to try and put a structure on it. And since this class is really about both argumentative structure and I've introduced elements of philosophical inquiry uh, and rhetoric and stuff like that. I think this might be a place where you can find a lot of those elements if I do invite you on the final to do that. So let me move forward toward a new consciousness. She identifies a place called the crossroads, which is a place of establishing identity, which exists at the crossroads of many definitions. So any definition that she uses for herself is assumed to be a complex relationship of different things, not just a binary. Like if I just say, for example, that I were Mexican American, it would say as opposed to white. That's usually how we explain that binary. Or I'm racially this as opposed to that. She may argue that both of them can be true at the same time, right? We can exist in that place where the Mexican American experience, whether through language or identity or genetics, meets the experience of the purely American, right? And so that place of crossing can be a place where we discover new things about identity and the complexity of the way we think about ourselves. So moving forward a little bit, we go into the tangle of pathology in Race-Based America, I think is the full term, the full title. It is connected sort of, but there is a looser connection maybe than in other sections. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is that I selected these to sort of place next to each other. But it may be hard to find really direct connections because the tangle of pathology really talks about sort of the pathology of race, meaning how people diagnose conditions within a system, and the other one is more about sort of aspects of identity and the complexity of that relationship. So as long as you understand that distinction, I think if you do make connections, more power to you. But I think that there's room there to probably create a little bit more analysis if you are connecting these two a little bit more directly than they appear to be on the surface. So in this one, going back to that idea of rhetorical structure and argumentative structure, the author sets up a context and a premise by highlighting ongoing deficiencies or weaknesses and that complicate a simplified approach to statistics and analysis of those stats. So in other words, that's a big pill to swallow, but she's basically using stats and analysis, unlike maybe Anzaldúa, the last author who used identity and sort of self-reflection as a model, right? So this has a lot of statistics and analysis of those statistics to highlight deficiencies and weaknesses in strategies that have been developed to try and tackle this idea of inequality and race. Okay, so she offers some specific solutions and concrete examples. I won't say unlike Anzaldúa, because she does offer some solutions in terms of finding an identity, but her approach was less had to do with sort of the diagnostic, there's a problem within the racial community. These are some solutions, right? In Anzaldúa's case, it was more like the perceptions of our identity are more complicated than we appear. So the more complexity we have, it's just a different cat to skin, if you could excuse my metaphor, my tortured metaphor there. So it offers concrete specific solutions. It takes apart the idea of the post-racial idea. Post-racial is a term that pops up, okay? So that's another one that I'm going to identify as perhaps important, is that to at least understand that. So even if I don't use that term as directly as, saying define post-racial, I don't think I would ask that question per se. But I may use that idea of, have we moved beyond race? Is the idea of racial discrimination in some ways obsolete, right? And I think, obviously I have my own opinions about it, but that is a position, right? The position is that, as exemplified maybe in, Obama was elected, so we shouldn't, you shouldn't complain anymore, right? That's a very simplified, argument of the argument that would be made, but that is an example, right, about how the post-racial idea, and even in the essay it says that Obama, at least talked about believing in that idea of post-racial, right? You've elected me, so now, I'll make you feel better about race, right? And so we can move beyond that. So even Obama himself, right, proposed that idea as, as him being a model for the representation of this post-racial idea, right? So it's not unfair to point that out and, criticize it, or in some cases maybe support it, not wholly, but I don't know if I could really see wholly supporting it, but at least some of the ideas have at least a smidgen of legitimacy because it's an idea that's appealing, right? The idea that we can look beyond race. That's an ideal scenario, right? So in some cases that may pan out, but in other cases it's a lot more complicated than that, right? So the premises of this particular trope is that civil rights has ended and that structural barriers are down, right? So inefficiencies within the system have more to do with people's, for example, effort than the barriers themselves, right? We all have barriers, right? If you have racial barriers, then in discriminatory barriers, then it's not any more or greater or less than other barriers that other people have, right? It may be slightly different in terms of flavor, but but those barriers are not any more of a hindrance than they would be if you were born, poor as opposed to black, right? That's the idea, right? So that's an assumption, at least, that needs to be made if you're thinking about the post-racial idea. The other trope, meaning sort of identifying characteristic, I suppose is the best way of putting it, is that we need to leave behind those grievances because the grievances we have about race are really the only thing that's dragging us back, or at least it's one of the major things. That recognize the complicity in the continuation of racial inequality. What I mean by that when I made that note is an idea that is advanced by post-racial people that promote that idea, I should say, is that there is a complicity, right? When racial inequality is continued, it's the individuals in some ways that are responsible for that because they're complicit within it, right? So if a black community is poor, then you really gotta look at the ways that they are, advancing that poorness, so to speak, right? For example, marriage, right? There's lots of single mothers in the hood, and that promotes the idea of dependency upon the government. And so to break that cycle is really the key rather than trying to, tackle these mysterious larger structural issues, right? Look at the ways that you can tackle individuals' contribution and see if we can correct that behavior. And then everything else will kind of solve itself, right? So it's about more the individual than anything else. It explains this essay also explains three gaps: the employment gap, wealth gap, self-employment gap. And then it does also, like I suggested at the beginning, is that it offers some targeted race-based policies and solutions that it itself seems to suggest are not ideal or even maybe workable in many ways, always. But they are things to consider, and if you're dismissing them, then it's up to you to come up with better ideas, right? If you don't have any better ideas, then let's just go with these, right? I guess that's one of the suggestions, at least by offering these at the end, right? It's like, okay, now you can open it up to whatever argument you want to make. Do you really want to solve it if you're not offering any solutions, right? That could be a suggestion by doing that at the end. Okay, so that runs out. That's about 14 something. So I will continue with the myth of race, perhaps. In the next one, I'll take a look at that. Okay, so I'll see you in a second.